Hey kids, howdy, and welcome to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology, and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. That's me. So it's a quiet week. It's a crazy month, but it's a quiet week. We're talking about the 14th through the 20th.
Yeah, what does that mean? Like, you were telling me it's the
What it
hot
means from
summer
my
starting,
perspective,
but
right? There's like two ways to think of it, right?
Sure.
There's one from just a production perspective,
Okay.
right? That I look at the week, and it's not like there's nothing happening, but there's nothing that merits talking about on the podcast because I like to focus on the big chunky things. So from
Sure.
just a production standpoint, it's like, well, I have less to talk about. But from an astrological perspective, like there's a lot of times where people make a kind of assumption that like if the planets are slim or quiet, that like their life is going to be quiet. Right. And so I've had to like find better language rather than the planets are quiet, because there's just no such thing. There might not be a
Right.
planetary hit on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but there's no such thing as quiet because we've had a huge bang behind us and another one in front of us. So it's an air quotes quiet week, but it is Mercury going retrograde. So we've got an interesting thing to talk about.
That's kind of a big thing. I feel like there's always a good amount to talk about when
Absolutely.
it
And
happens.
it's one of those astrological phenomenon that hits every single one of us at an
Right.
individual and a collective level. So we're going to talk about both that. I have a couple of little announcements. My new class, The Disciplined Mind, is coming up. It's a brand new class. I've been thinking about this for years, and people have been saying, when are you going to teach? When are you going to teach a class about disciplining the mind? So we're going to talk about how the mind works, how it works for you, and how you can rework it in a 4-week class that starts on August 2nd.
Oh, so there's some time then.
Yeah, there's some time. It's at the point
Great.
of like announcing save the date, kids, a 4-week class. Another thing that I'm doing that I don't have a date for, but will be soon, within the next week and a half or so, I'm going to be doing a very short webinar on what is a void moon.
Okay.
Absolutely free. The moon goes void every 2.5 days. And I get a lot of questions as my social media reach grows. I get a lot of questions about, well, what is a void moon? And I've talked about it so many times, I decided to do an actual answer video that will go into my astrology school, but I'll do it live in the next couple of weeks. So look for announcements for that. And if you don't get my email announcements and you listen to this podcast, kids, you should be on my mailing list. Just go to michaellennox.com, scroll all the way down, and put your email address into my newsletter so you don't miss any announcements. I figured since we've got a shorter astrology section, I will do 2 questions to answer. One that's a fairly short form answer and one that's really interesting to me that I'm excited to explore. So here's a question from Jennifer. Hello, I am curious about the 4 quadrants in the birth chart. I was born with Pluto in my 12th house, so it has been traveling through that first quadrant in my birth chart. Does each quadrant have its own theme? What if you have planets clustered in particular quadrants of your chart? Thank you. Love your podcast so much. Jennifer. Yes, indeed. Each of the 4 quadrants has a specific and significant meaning that's different from each. And yeah, Pluto moves so little in a lifetime because he's got a 250-year orbit. We've got about an 85-year life cycle. So wherever Pluto starts out, he's going to probably spend your whole life traversing one quadrant. right? So Jennifer had Pluto in her 12th, so that means that at some point, that planet of death and rebirth entered her first and second and third house, so probably just the first because of how slow he moves. And that'll be the case for all of us. So yes, indeed, each of the 4 quadrants has a different meaning. Go into that in a second, but I'll point out that Jennifer's question stemmed from knowing where Pluto was when she was born. And indeed, Pluto moves so slowly that he's only going to traverse about 1/3 of your chart from birth to death if you live a full life. So where he is placed when you're born, which is why it's really important to know your time of birth, because then it'll tell you what houses Pluto's going to traverse during your lifetime, and it's not going to be all 12. It's most likely going to be 4. Everything in astrology in the shape of the chart builds on top of each other. There's always an elegance in the way things are ordered. The 12 signs are ordered in a very elegant way, telling an archetypal story, leaving you with a whole community of archetypes by the time the story is finished. All of the signs within a same element has an evolution from, say, the first water, second water, and third water signs. So similarly, the quadrants, which each contain 3 houses, also have an elegance, and it has to start with self, right? Because we're born, we dive in from the void into a body. That's the first house. Second house is what do I want? Third house is how do I communicate? That's the self, interacting with the self. So the theme there would be change and transformation, if we're talking about Pluto, or just in general, the first quadrant is about you and your body, if you will. The second quadrant, which is still on the bottom of the chart, which we actually call the northern hemisphere. So it's the bottom of the chart, which means it's still personal, only now it's not you with you, it's you in your environment. 4th house, home. 5th house, how you have joy. 6th house, how you approach your daily routine. So second quadrant's meaning is how do you interact with your immediate environment? Then we go up to the top of the chart. Now we're in public life. And so 7, 8, 9, the third quadrant is about your relationships, relating to others directly in the 7th house. 8th house is about collaboration and change that happens when we're with others. And then the 9th house is what happens when we sort of spread around the world with others and learn. So the third quadrant's meaning would be I, me, in relationship to my outside world. And then 10, 11, 12 is like the institutions you connect to. So 10 would be your work and career, but also like the public life that's institutional as opposed to personal, your work and career. 11th house is the community you dwell with out there in the larger public institutions. And the 12th house is the house of like the enormous institutions, the corporations, the governments, things that are much, much bigger than us as little individuals. So self to self, first quadrant, self to environment, second quadrant, self to others in the world, third quadrant, self to institutions, fourth quadrant. And you can take a look at your chart and see which quadrant has more planets in it. That's a quadrant you favor. And so that's something that you can interpret in a chart. Are the planets spread out? Is there a balance around the quadrants? But if there's a quadrant that is jam-packed, filled with planets, and another one that's more empty, the one that has the planets is where you're going to be doing more interesting interacting and changing and growing and moving. And the empty ones aren't empty. They're just in the 3-dimensional space of you, less concerned with the quadrants where the planets are focused. Now, this question comes from Jenna and just got me so excited because it was a surprising question, something I've never thought about. But you can cast an astrological chart for anything.
Right. You talk about America.
An organization, a corporation, a building, a business, as long as you have a date. Right? Just like the USA chart is July 4th, 1776, Philadelphia,
Right,
Pennsylvania. you can create a chart for anything that you have a starting date for. So this is what Jenna writes. Dear Michael, I've been part of Alcoholics Anonymous for the past 8 years. And for the last 18 months or so, I've been sensing a significant shift in the program. It feels like more than just generational or cultural change, almost like a deeper structural evolution is underway. AA is generally considered to have begun on June 10th, 1935, the day Dr. Bob took his last drink. That puts the program at 90 years old. Is AA entering a Saturn return? And if so, how might that show up for a collective? Thank you for your work. It has been a huge gift and much appreciation to Zoe for helping bring your voice to all of us. Sending love and light, Jenna.
This is so interesting.
So interesting.
Whoa. Because, like, you've talked about, the chart of America, whatever, but
Yeah.
you're right. I haven't thought about it on a smaller scale of, like, an org or company.
Now, if I set up AA's chart for June 10th, 35, New York, because that's where Dr. Bob was, for 12 p.m., because that's a standard way of, you do a sunrise chart, I do a noon chart. Like when you don't know what time of birth, you either set a chart with the sun rising. I like the noon. And I got to tell you, having never looked at this chart before, like noon is the right technique for this, because ultimately the 12 steps of AA and then every other 12-step program that came from it is a path to God. It's 12 steps that if you follow them will lead you to a spiritual connection with a power greater than yourself. And the brilliance of the AA model is there's no dogma. Your God and my God can be completely different. I worked with a woman. I have a lot of experience in 12 steps, not at the moment, but in my life. I worked with a woman once who was like, I don't know what God is. I talked to her a little bit about her mind and imagination. And for the first, year or so, God was a lamp in her mind's eye that she could turn on.
Cool.
And that led, so.
Personal, it was her personal.
Right. It got her connected in a way that I could have shared with her everything that I know about connecting to a power greater than self, but they wouldn't resonate because I'm me, she's her.
Yeah.
And AA created this idea. Now, that said, AA was patriarchal, misogynistic, a built of its time. If you ever pick up the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it will blow you away for its archaic and disjointed and out-of-date nature.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
So right there is an interesting thing that might be happening collectively because we're in such a different place, and the generation that rose up with AA and its patriarchal, misogynistic perspective is dying out. And so there better be a new thing coming up. But back to the spiritual program, Virgo would be on the rise of this chart at 12 noon, which is the sign of healing and putting things together. If there are 12 steps, Virgo says so. She's the one who organized it all into 12 steps. And right at the rise is Neptune, the planet of God connection. So is Black Moon Lilith, the planet of shadow at the personal level. That's perfect rising sign for a program that gets you connected to God, but you have to pass through shadow first. Gemini Sun, Gemini Chiron, and Gemini Midheaven means it's a program about talking and connecting to others in community through words. The Mercury of AA is retrograde Cancer in the 10th house, which means right up there next to the identity of AA is the capacity to create a really safe crucible in the Cancer mentality where talking can go very, very, very deep so that you can be vulnerable and revealing to have a transformation through talking. Now, I got to pull the gloves off because AA is a cult. It fits the exact proper definition of cult that thinkers and pundits and anthropologists who study such things, who came up with the parameter of what's a cult. There's a charismatic leader, even though he's not alive any longer. There's the kowtowing to the group think, and you're sort of pushed out if you disagree.
Do you mean like if you don't agree with the way the 12 steps go, people are like, I don't know
Well,
if you should
here's
be
the
here.
thing about that, and why any 12-stepper who is getting something out of the program would absolutely push back at what I'm saying and say, no, 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 that's not true. But I'm here to tell you, yes, it's absolutely true. But it's subtle. In other words, if you keep slipping and can't get your shit together with sobriety, and the only requirement for membership, this is a tradition, is the desire to stop drinking, you are welcome. They will say, keep coming back, and you will never be sort of pushed out for not staying clean and sober, because that's what the program is about.
Mm-hmm.
In theory. Because AA is peopled with people.
Yeah.
So the principle is we don't, in fact, the traditions of AA are much more powerful to me than the steps. There have been billions of paths to God
Sure.
and all of them work. But the traditions were the 12 sort of parameters of how to run a group. And one of them was the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking.
Yeah.
So therefore, everyone is welcome, even if they're struggling. But the personalities are, I think, challenging to that idea, because you will face judgment, and people will gossip about you and sort of cast you aside. And then they say things like, it only works if you work it.
Right.
Which is true. You can't find God unless you work the steps.
Okay, I love that saying. I know you're about to be critical of it, but...
Well, actually, I'm not critical of that. I'm actually critical of the people who won't work the steps, hang out, and hope to get something by osmosis. The then group narrative will be, it only works if you work it. And you can say that from a loving, uplifting place, or you could say it in a gossipy, contemptuous place.
Yeah, okay.
Where you are disowned if you're not working the program as it's designed to work and towing the line of all of the group speak. So, bona fide cult. Now, I'm going to counter this by saying I got clean in Narcotics Anonymous in New York City in the 80s when I was 24 years old. When I moved to LA, I started going to AA meetings because that's what the gays were doing in LA. Well, in New York, there were gay meetings for, specialty meetings for gay addicts, and I went to all of them, and there were no such thing in LA, but all of the addicts in Los Angeles who should be in NA, the gays would just go to AA, and it was a very gay thing in LA. And that worked for me for a while, and I stayed clean for a good 15, 16, 17 years. And then I did a little experiment and left, and that worked for a couple of years, but the addict came back, after a while. And then I went through the enormous spiritual shift that I went through at 39 and 40. And from that moment on, it's a longer story than this, but I've moved into a place now where I don't need to go to a 12-step program to not drink or use pills or any of the things that grabbed my addict in the past. And I choose to smoke cannabis. And therefore, I would not be welcome in a meeting if I felt like I needed to go to a meeting to stay away from, pills and booze. And I've talked a lot about this. Someone has written in and asked me if I will talk about this as a question. And my answer was I might. And so after this question, I just might talk about that in greater depth, because in terms of this little topic, I'll leave you all with this. My life worked, and my transformation happened because I went into 12-step rooms at 24 years old and stayed for 15 years. I learned how to take responsibility for everything that I did. My part, I cleaned up my street. I learned that there. Looking at all of my deepest, darkest secrets, I learned that there. Understanding that a connection to God was possible 24/7, I learned there, though it took a long while to get there. Remember, a woman came up to me that I knew from my childhood and talking about the prayer thing. She said, just start with please in the morning and thank you at night. And I was Like every day? Meanwhile, now I'm, praying 24/7. So there are, in fact, two very interesting things that happen to the chart of AA. And one of them is, in fact, the Saturn return, and the other is the Uranus return. So this is really interesting to me. So let's start with the Saturn return. The AA chart has Saturn in Pisces. That makes total sense because the diligence, the responsibility, and the work of the steps is to connect you to spirit. That's Pisces. So perfect placement for Saturn in the chart. Just last year, Saturn passed through where he was when AA was born back in the 30s. So in fact, we are just over the Saturn return. In fact, Saturn moving into Aries sort of completes that. But it does mean that the organization is in a deep consideration of what does it have to learn to move to the next iteration of its consciousness. This would be the third Saturn return of AA. Be very interesting to look 30 years ago and 60 years ago to see if there was anything either in the world stage or in the program, because that's what Saturn returns do. They prepare us for the wisdom needed in the next chapter.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what makes this even more interesting is that if we add the Uranus return, which is the life cycle, right? That we grow and live and die in an 85-year or 84-year notion of a life lived. That's the Uranus orbit. So one could say that in a way, AA died a death at the Uranus return. In fact, I love to say this story. My mother, I think, did me a beautiful favor, and she passed during her Uranus return, which to me was like a gift of the astrologer. It's like, hey, Mike, I'll go now because it lines up with what you're devoted to. And I keep saying I want to go out with my Uranus return because I don't want to be here any longer than 84, 85 years. But the Uranus return is a death moment, and it peaked during the pandemic. So that's really interesting to me, that when the world pulled all the way inside itself, had a change and transformation and a death to self and a rebirth, that hit AA at the heart of this is what I am in terms of a transformative experience, an awakening experience. So I haven't been to an AA meeting in 20 years, but if Jenna is feeling something shifting, it certainly makes sense astrologically, because the world has changed ridiculously since the pandemic, and somehow so has AA. So Mercury is in Leo. It's a very bizarre cycle. That's why I'm
Okay.
finding it challenging to get into. So let me just start from
Sure.
the tippity top. So, as I said at the top, there's very little going on this week astrologically, with the exception of Mercury turning around and going retrograde on Thursday. Mercury retrogrades are certainly major astrological experiences, and this one is particularly bizarre in a way that I'm not sure I've ever seen before. So let's just sort of unpack all of it. So let's start with the basics. The retrograde shadow began on June 30th. So that means that as of that date and through Thursday of this week, when Mercury turns around, is all of the material that Mercury touched off that's likely to be part of his backward journey. So you keep track of things that happen in your thoughts, in your intellectual and written-oriented projects, your conversations, how you're perceiving things at the moment. So you want to look back at anything and everything that happened from the neck up between the 30th of June and this Thursday. So conversations you've had, thoughts you're entertaining, projects that relate to intellectual things or written stuff. Anything that was challenging, you need to be aware of or make note of so that when it comes up again between the July 17th and August 10th, when Mercury's moving backwards, you'll be more prepared and have a greater understanding of what you're trying to figure out or learn or be shown if you pay attention to what was going on between the 30th and July 17th. We'll talk about this in August, but on the 10th, Mercury will go direct and wrap everything up between the 10th and the 24th of the same month. And those are the dates of the cycle. The sign is Leo. So it's all about centering ourselves in a strong, powerful voice. I think it's elegant that when we had the triple retrograde shit show at the beginning of the year, when all three personal planets were retrograde, Mercury was moving back and forth between Pisces and Aries, helping our mind and our thinking and our perceptions know how to let go of the mental and lean back into the energetic and spiritual for guidance and flow, right? Nobody is, clean and clear enough of the mind than they maybe ought to be, right?
Yeah.
Because the thinking, like I like to say, thinking brings you nothing. You might as well replace all thinking with prayer because you're not going to be missing anything and you'll be lighting up your mind, with a connection to the divine. And Mercury going back and forth between Pisces and Aries was that for us. And at the same time, Mars was teaching us how to center ourselves in our bodies by starting out in Leo, where we are bold and extroverted and centering of self, and back into Cancer, where we learn the proper preparations and restfulness that we need in order to match the demands of us in a Leonian kind of way. So the fact that the very next Mercury retrograde is in the sign of Leo, where Mars told us how to be bigger, bolder, and more centering of self, that's chef's kiss. That means our minds are all getting a review of what your personal creativity is sort of wrapped around. Leo invented joy and creative expression. So he gets to do all of the yummy, fun things in life. And so when Mercury is in this sign, our minds and our voices are getting aligned with the part of us that's ready to rock it out, be more present and creative and visible. So now we get to the strange part. You've heard me use the term triple transits. Triple transit refers to a retrograding planet making three of the same transit by virtue of the retrograde motion. They hit it first direct, then they turn around and hit it again, then they go direct, and cover the same territory a third and final time. So if I'm ever going to teach about or talk about the sort of essence of what the retrograde is bringing us, we start in the way that I already have, and we've identified the themes archetypally that connect to Leo and how that relates to earlier retrogrades in the year. The next teaching would be to tell you all the triple transits that Mercury is making during this whole cycle. Are you ready? Cue the silence. There are none.
Oh.
There are none.
Wow.
So I don't know that I've ever seen this before.
Yeah.
Like,
wow.
I mean, never say never, and I can't remember yesterday, let alone 15 years ago. And 15, 20 years ago, I wasn't a social media astrologer. Like I might have been in the astrology every day, but not in the way I am now and have been for the past 15 years. So maybe this has happened periodically. But Mercury is in the middle of Leo. right? From the halfway through the first decan, that's the first 10 degrees to 15, right? So that's where the juicy degree points would be, between 4 and 15. Well, nothing is sitting before 4 and 15, between 4 and 15 during the Mercury retrograde. Part of this is because all of the outer planets have changed signs and they are all at like 1 and 2 and 3 degrees. So 4 to 15 won't touch any of the outer planets. And then the rest of the setup of personal planets will also sort of not do a full Tripoli transit. In a minute, I'm going to go through some of the energy that Mercury is passing through, but I want to see if I can find language for how to hold this up as valuable for us archetypally. I'll say it like this. Every sign is connected to every other sign because it's a system.
Right.
You've got all of these planets and some points that are created by the Earth's movement. So there's all of these possibilities for Mercury to make these connections to create a narrative about what he wants us to get. But if he's alone and not touching anybody else, and the sign is Leo, I think the message is that we get to find our confidence and our true willingness to be as big and bold as we can without any of our other pieces of consciousness fucking that up with insecurity or I'm not big enough for that or why me kind of hesitancy. So we all need to be standing in our powerful voices without shrinking back. So I kind of like that Mercury isn't being told what to do by any of the slower moving planets. He's just going into our unconscious spaces saying, let's find a bigger trumpet. Now, even more interestingly, Mercury's going to hit certain things on a one-off basis during June and July that I'll talk about in a moment. But he is going to make a double transit by sextiling another planet. First in early June, so it didn't have anything to do with the pre-retrograde. It hit before Mercury reached his shadow on the 30th. This will hit not at all in the retrograde, but twice in the wrap-up. And it's Mars. Mercury is sextiling Mars. Mars just spent 17 years in Leo last fall and the early part of this year, as I just got done sort of calling back up. So it's fascinating to me that in a solo Mercury retrograde, the one planet that Mercury is making some direct contact with is Mars, who already knows how to help us center ourselves in an embodied way because we learned that last fall and early part of the year. There was an opposition from Mercury to Pluto, but it was 2 days before the shadow started. Saturn, Neptune, Uranus, too early for Mercury to make any contact with. Chiron, too late, right? He's off in the later degrees of Aries. Too close to Jupiter to connect with him at all. Then right at the retrograding moment on Thursday, Mercury will sextile Venus, but then not again in the retrograde or in the wrap-up. So that tells me that we enter this 2.5 weeks of bumping into the furniture with love kissing us goodbye, saying, "Mwah, I'll see you on the other side." So I'd love that. It's a sextile, which means you might need to do some effort to call that love in. But I would do that on Thursday if you want to pay attention to this retrograde in a big way. As you say a little prayer that says, I welcome this, understand that love is there, making what's likely to be the journey ahead more yummy and palatable because we won't abandon love as the mind goes into the below. I have never had to prepare to talk about a Mercury retrograde cycle more than this. First of all, I stared at my computer for like 5 minutes saying, this can't be right. I must have the wrong dates, or I pushed a wrong, tab setting in my program. But I do love this for all of us because indeed, the world, as I've been saying ad infinitum, needs us all to be activated and powerfully in our voices, bringing whatever it is we're called to bring. So an activated voice changes the environment you're in. So I don't care if that ministry has 3 people, 30 people, 300, 3,000, 300,000, or 3 million. Everybody activated in a powerful creative offering to the world helps to usher in the possibility for peace for humanity. And this week, it certainly starts with knowing your gifts and being willing to trumpet them out there in a powerful way. Have at it.
Did you know that Michael has a daily astro alert? If you enjoy hearing the weekly astrology, you might like knowing more about each day. When you subscribe for the daily astro alerts, you'll get an in-depth explanation of the day's astrology sent right to your email. Subscriptions are only $10 a month, or you can purchase the yearly subscription at the reduced price of $100. To subscribe, head over to michaellennox.com. All right, it's dream segment time. Every week, Dr. Michael will interpret dreams that are sent in via email or take a live caller. If you would like your dream interpreted on the podcast, you can go ahead and email us at dreams@michaellennox.com. Hopefully your dream will make it onto the show.
So we have, you know what? This has like sci-fi in it. I'm hoping that it'll make sense to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
So we have an email and dream from Mary, and here is her dream. I am in an amusement park setting with national park rangers running the park. It is sci-fi like, and there are little robots looking like Daleks from the TV series Doctor Who.
Oh, okay.
FYI, I have never watched Doctor Who. The robots are buzzing around and people are hopping on them. They're dangerous, but people are riding them anyways. Then, still in the park, but the robots are not around, there's a woman with a very cute little baby boy, and she's holding him so he faces me and he sticks his tongue out at me. His tongue is oversized, not that of a baby. He keeps sticking it out and rolling it back in its mouth. I'm afraid he'll swallow it, but he doesn't. The baby is very happy. Another woman, possibly my younger sister, tells the nanny holding the baby to keep the baby focused on my mom, who's with us. And it's a younger version of her mom. The baby ends up at a campsite and takes a high jump, as if on a trampoline, onto one of the robots. The dream ends with the robots on a podium getting prizes. I keep a dream journal, and normally I can figure out my dreams, but this is too sci-fi for me to understand.
I love that.
I'm also taking your healing anxious attachments class. Don't know if there's a correlation.
Oh my God. I'm teaching that right now. And in fact, there's one more class this Saturday, and there's ways that this dream completely replicates the process of the class. But at the same time, this dream also, I think, speaks to what's happening in the United States right now at the public level.
Okay.
Well, let me start with this. While, I was double tasking, I know Doctor Who enough to have a sense of what the theme of the show is about,
Mm-hmm.
but those particular robots, I haven't seen it enough to know enough to be in dream interpretation state. So when I just took a half a moment and slipped over to the best dream dictionary ever, Google, those robots are in the lore of the show thought to represent fascism and extremism.
Okay, this is very topical.
Right. So I can't argue with that. And even with her saying, I've never watched the show, that's the beauty of Dreamland. This is what Jung learned, that there were connections. He would sit with his patients in Switzerland and find them dreaming of mythological figures that they couldn't possibly know that he knew about, right? And he introduced us to the idea that in dreams, you can vibe on something even if you have no experience of it personally, because you're in the collective experience. So that piece was an interesting informing for me in the dream. I certainly knew they were something about intellect and thought, and that they weren't organic, like free thought or, creative thought or, robots. It's like a robotic, repetitive, mechanical way of thinking because they fly around. But the added fascism then becomes key for this part of the dream interpretation that I think is speaking to the collective. So I'm going to start with that. It's an interesting scenario, Zoe, because Mary is both in an amusement park, which suggests like the roller coaster ride of life, that life is a function of different rides we have to ride. An amusement park is a good symbol for the chaos that life often is. But park rangers, national park rangers, they relate to national parks. They relate to the beautiful lands in the United States that the new fascist government is not interested in.
Right.
Right. So there's just something interesting about the dream being about life's chaos, but also something in there is talking about current events because of these park rangers. So it's like if we go back to the Daleks as representing like fascism and fascist thoughts, people are hopping on them. That's like people in the United States saying, I love everything Trump is doing. This is what I voted for. That's like people jumping up to dangerous fascistic thoughts and writing it anyway. Now, the cute boy, I got like 9 months, but that might have been my imagination.
That's your imagination. She just said a cute little baby boy.
So he's a baby boy,
But it's
certainly
it's a
young enough
baby,
to be
yeah.
easily held up.
Yeah.
Right. So that's like 9-10 months. That's, not a year and a
less.
half.
Sure. Right.
Well, I'm making the boy 9 months because of the class piece, which I'll talk about when I finish up the fascism piece. Now, forgive me, Mary, if I am just too caught up in this everybody needs to get activated principle, and I might be bastardizing your dream through that, bias that I'm having right now. But the youth of the boy, we'll just say year or under, means there's a new consciousness that Mary is vibing with. It's masculine in nature, which suggests to me that when it grows and becomes, sovereign, it's a consciousness of doing, not creatively being. It's a boy. It's young, which means it's a new consciousness, but its tongue is like an adult-sized tongue. That to me tells me it's about the voice and the capacity to articulate important things. That's what the tongue does. But this idea in Mary is only a year or so old. It hasn't grown enough to grow into the tongue, right? And even the rolling it back and that sort of weird image in the dream where she's afraid he'll swallow it, to me, because he doesn't swallow it, so it's not about him swallowing it. It's about him sort of wrapping himself around the idea that there's this big tongue that he has to grow into. So is this accurate? In the campsite, Mary high jumps onto one of the robots?
The baby does. The baby ends up at a campsite and takes a jump onto the robot.
There's my interpretation. The baby is the one from an organic place, the campsite, like where we've got nothing about work consciousness, urban consciousness, educative consciousness. We're just at the campfire. That's basic humanity. At the level of simple humanity who gathered around the fire to create community in the first place, has this young energy that's got a voice, and it jumps up and grabs one of the fascistic thoughts. That fulfills my fantasy that the purpose of this child is to have something to be said about these thoughts that are floating around. And the last scene from this perspective of the dream, robots getting prizes at a podium, that to me looks like a fascist government sort of rewarding itself for having successfully taken over the United States.
Yes. Oh, wow.
So again, I may be projecting wildly. Mary, you can let us know. But I want to point this out because Mary is in my anxious attachment class. And so if park rangers are about organic space, the amusement park might be a symbol for the chaos and the confusion around connection and attachment. Then the robots up there are thoughts of I don't fit in, or I'm anxious, or I can't relate, or I am, too broken to be loved. But there's a young part of her that's about a year old that is the potential to wake up to a new kind of attachment. And by having the baby face grandma, then we know we're talking about generational, patterns in the mouth, in the voice that are impacting generation upon generation upon generation unless Mary does the work of letting this part of her grow enough to attack those robotic thoughts of disconnect. And the fourth class, and Mary would already have this homework at this, when this podcast comes out, is a meditation that's designed to take them back to their 9-month-old inner child.
Love it.
The idea being that before you became sort of mobile and toddlerish, but after the break that happens at 6 months that creates the personality, you are at the most secure you could possibly be given your life, your parents, your family, etc. And so in the idea of inner child work being a panacea for connection anxieties, this was the sort of intervention of the class. So I think it's hysterical that Mary's in my class on healing your anxious attachment and has a dream that relates, from my perspective, to Mary also working on her attachment issues in a really powerful way.
Thank you for listening to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. You can find us on Apple Music, the iHeartRadio app, and anywhere you find your favorite shows. Head on over to michaellennox.com for information on astrology readings, the Daily Astro Alert subscription, upcoming classes, and to join the mailing list.